You asked a very interesting question last night. You said, I just want to be happy.
Correct.
Well, that's the big question everybody's been asking for thousands of years, millions of years. And you started out on the spiritual path, you know?
Correct.
And, you know, it took you to a certain place, but then you felt there's still something missing, you know? Now, I grew up in a wealthy community where people were not really pursuing the so-called spiritual path. They were pursuing the material path. And they were pursuing happiness, which for them meant acquiring, you know, getting a good job or starting their own company, you know, being married, having children, pursuing material well-being. Some of them are high up in the government, advisors to the president. They owned multinational corporations, and they weren't happy, you know. So this is the big conundrum, how to be happy, you know. And I think this is what Buddha was looking for. He grew up a prince in the palace. He could have anything he wanted, you know, but he was not allowed to see suffering, you know. But I think he realized even in the palace there was suffering, you know. So he kind of broke away, escaped from the palace, and he saw that people got old and got sick and died, you know. And so he said, what is the purpose of life? You know, why am I really here? And what is happiness? And even before happiness, how can I avoid suffering? And so the real, you know, Buddhist path is focused on to realize life does not guarantee you happiness. In fact, the majority of humanity is suffering to some degree, you know, and looking for happiness, you know. So he came up with, you know, the Noble Eightfold Path that you're only going to be happy if you live a dharmic life, you know, that you speak well of other people, you have a job that is not hurting people, you're not polluting, and you think well of other people, and, you know, you act well, right action, right livelihood, all these kind of things. And then also self-observation, that if you're having a lot of fears or doubts or judgments or anger, that also needs to be looked at. And by looking at it, you can find the causes of those things and dissolve them, dissolve the causes, you know. And then, of course, the last one is the one people remember the most, right meditation, which is where you really find the joy in the divine consciousness. He didn't call it divine consciousness, but in the pure consciousness of the oneness of all creation, you know, that there's what they call the Buddha mind or the universal mind. And when you can tune into that and realize that the mind that you are, the real mind, free of all the obscurations or all the images we project on it, that pure mind is happiness, you know. So it's like we're really all Buddhas, we're all enlightened. Our basic consciousness is enlightened, but we're not looking at that. We're looking at all the shadows. Like your light casts shadows, just like the sun casts shadows. And if you look at the shadows, you don't see the sun. So we're busy looking at the shadows that our consciousness casts. But if you turn back to the source and look at the light within you, the love within you, then you, wow, that's what I really am. And that's called realization of your Buddha nature, you know? And then Buddha came up with this he had this amazing realization, which I think is the same one that you had recently. He was meditating, he was practicing all kinds of austerities, you know? I mean, he was not just vegan, he was like super ascetic, barely ate, just enough to stay alive. He was skin and bones, and still not enlightened though, practicing all kinds of austerities, meditating hours a day. And one day he saw a boat going up the river, and there was a sitar player on the boat trying to tune the instrument. And he realized that if the string were tuned too high, that it would snap. And if the string were too loose, it wouldn't make any sound, So he realized it had to be tuned the middle way, so he realized that was like his life, that you didn't have to go to one extreme or the other. In fact, those were dangers, that you could live an ordinary life, and be in the world and still achieve enlightenment, or at least achieve happiness anyway. And of course the suffering came from people grasping at something. It doesn't have to be grasping at just material things. It could be grasping at spiritual things. Like, I want to raise my kundalini. That's grasping too, or I want to have certain powers. I want to be psychic, or I want to channel messages, or something like that, I want to be able to levitate or be a breatharian. That's grasping, and you feel sad if you don't achieve those things. If, I told someone, meditate on the light in the center of your being, and a year later she said, I've been doing that and I still haven't seen the light. She was thinking it was going to be like a light bulb, and I said, well, it's actually more of a feeling. You kind of imagine it as a light, but it also is like love. If you think of someone you love, you're not necessarily going to see a light there, but you feel the energy there. And that's the beginning of, really awakening as a spiritual being, is feeling that consciousness within you, not just there, but in every cell of your body. So it doesn't, the spiritual life doesn't look like any particular thing for one person or another, but it can be realized right in the midst of daily life, And people, it's not like one extreme or the other, like the ascetic path and then the path of hedonism or pleasure or whatever you want to call it, being in the world. The greatest shock that I had was going from ascetic life to being married and having a child. And I found I had to practice far greater renunciation being married and raising a child. I mean, you talk about ego surrender. When an infant is put into your hands, or your own, in this case, my child was born on the bedroom floor, and here is my baby looking at me like you're God, I suddenly realized, what I had thought was my life was over. I had a whole new dharmic path, and that baby became my guru, the living guru right there. And, every moment that baby is telling you what it wants, what it needs, and what you have to do. You can't say later, I'm going to meditate for an hour, then I'm going to change your diapers, or then I'm going to feed you, So I had to realize, realize God in the moment, in that, and actually the Advaita, the oneness, can be realized doing that too, by saying that baby is an aspect of myself. It's not a distraction from myself. It is an aspect of myself. And when that infant looks at me with total trust and surrender, it's really putting me in touch with some of the deepest parts of myself, And talk about austerities, just when you're getting to go to sleep, the baby is waking up, and you've got to spend maybe another hour or two, get it ready to go back to sleep, to feed it, and then it wakes up again at 4 a.m, needing something. And, I used to wake up at 4 a.m. to meditate. Now I have to wake up at 4 a.m. to, change the diapers or feed it or carry it or hold it or whatever it was, But I got to it added to my spiritual development rather than detracting from it, And, partnering with another person is also a yoga. It's very different when you start living with somebody, very different than going out on a date and having fun, Like a woman came up to me in Mount Shasta many years ago and she said, I'm marrying so-and-so who is also a friend of mine. And I said, you what? Because I could foresee problems right away. And, they discovered after a week that he liked to sleep with the window open and she liked to sleep with the window closed. She was very sensitive to cold and air blowing around and stuff. And he had been raised that the way to be healthy was, be a he-man, have the window open, fresh air blowing in and stuff like that. And this was a major problem in their relationship, that they never discussed this, And they both had their own businesses, their own practices, but he had the expectation she would give up a lot of her practice to help him with his practice, And that's not how she viewed it. They never discussed this, And there were a lot of major issues. What happens if the children from a former marriage want to come and stay with you? Are you ready to have your partner's 2 teenagers from a previous marriage come and live with you while they get their act together? Say, I didn't sign up for this. I want the romance that we had on the, when we were dating. I just want it to be fun and joyous and passionate and have a good time. I didn't know I was signing up to live with your kids, and to give up my business for your business and to freeze at night because the window was open, they still had loved each other, but there were all these things they had never discussed, So, leading what you call the normal life is not necessarily the path to bliss and happiness, but if it's something your soul craves and you receive the guidance, I totally encourage you, to pursue that. And sometimes even, you can have a greater realization in the 2 minutes you have, between feeding the baby and taking the laundry out of the washing machine and putting it in the dryer. You have 2 minutes when you can tune in and feel, there's the presence of God, and I'm doing this all out of love. And, that sometimes is a greater realization than sitting for 2 hours, watching your breath or asking, who am I? Or doing Kriya Yoga, whatever it is, I lived with yogis in the Himalayas, up near, Babaji's cave there, and they were very high. They hardly slept. They hardly ate. They'd spend hours a day meditating. Maybe once a week, a group of them, the sadhus, would get together and hang out around the campfire. And they seemed pretty happy. But I remember I was there one day and a Western woman showed up who was, we were all hanging out with Ram Dass, or had been with Ram Dass, and she had been one of Ram Dass's students, or Neem Karoli Baba. And she showed up because she was sincerely interested in meeting these yogis, Well, they treated her terribly, like she was a temptress, They made comments behind her back to each, she couldn't understand what they were saying, but I understood they were calling her a temptress because this is their idea of a Western woman coming to meet these yogis. So I realized that these yogis, as high as they were, would probably have to reincarnate in the West, maybe as women, or have families, and, come to a greater realization of balance and life. You can't just exclude a whole 50% of humanity like that, So, I see women now that are born in Mount Shasta or come to Mount Shasta, they're maybe in their 20s, and I think this could have been that yogi that I knew in the Himalayas that meditated all the time. Now he's back in a female body, having to see life in a little bit different way, So there are many, many high people being born now that you can tell are, they really are, in touch with their Buddha nature or with the I am presence, but there's still certain human lessons they're trying to learn, you know. So Buddha called this following the middle path, you know. It's not one extreme or the other. Sometimes that's the most difficult thing to do, because the mind likes absolutes. It wants to join an organization or follow a set path and think all you have to do is follow this path or this guru or so on. Everything's taken care of. But just to be a normal person with a job or raising children, something like that, you know, there are no rules. There's no one to ask what to do in a particular situation, except you can always call your mom or your grandmother. I'm kidding, you know, but sometimes mom knows best, you know. And you know, you have to kind of wing it. And so then you really have to ask God in the moment. There's not time to call your mother or your grandmother or your guru. And your guru may be off giving workshops somewhere or whatever and doesn't want to be bothered, you know. So you say, I am the presence of God revealing to me what needs to be done in this moment, you know. And so that's definitely a spiritual practice. And, you know, realizing that God is with you at every moment. God knows everything you're doing. It doesn't matter what name you use, whether it's Ishwara or Wakantanka or Allah or Rama, whatever. God knows that you're calling on God, you know, and will respond to you depending on your sincerity and on the need, you know. So, or I am, that's the way to call God through you, instead of, you know, calling on God outside of you, to realize that you could not take a breath without God, you know. God is the force that animates your body, that tells your heart to beat and your lungs to breathe. So God is definitely aware of you. God is very smart. God has very good hearing and is in touch with you at every moment. You don't need to go to the Himalayas to find God. You know, that's the force it's in you. You wouldn't be sitting here without God, you know. So when you say I am, that's activating God to come forth. So it's very important what you say after I am, to say something positive. I am being shown what to do in this situation. I am being shown who I really am. I am the love of God in action. See, just talking about this, saying I am, it brings it through. And you're tuning into that. You feel that presence here. You know, if I say, who are you? You don't go, who me? Or who me? You go, me? That's because you feel the center of your being is focused there. That's like in India, they call the Jyoti, that's the sacred flame, is right there. Or people call it the heart chakra, something like that. So just thinking about it and feeling it, and then when you say I am, that activates it and brings more light through. So I am divine love flowing from my heart to yours, and you can say the same thing. That's what Anandamayi Mai did to me. I didn't hear her saying it, but the expression namaste means the God in me honors the God in you. Well, she didn't just say it, she did it. The God in her honored the God in me, and it was an energy she transmitted to me. And when I felt that, I went back to my cabin in Jagannath Puri and I meditated for 3 days. I said, I want to see in myself the God that she saw. And that was the greatest boost on my spiritual path, you know. So one of the greatest services you can do to humanity is to see everybody as God. You know, try to see the sun in the heart of every being. And even if they're doing something bad, try to see their basic goodness, that God is still in them, even though they have some illusions about their actions. You know. You feel that? Yeah, you feel that. So you're saying, I am the presence of God, not from the ego. Otherwise, it can become arrogance or condescension, but it's surrendering of the ego to the divine presence, And if you really do that, it makes you humble. You don't feel superior to anybody because you see the God presence in everybody. I think I told you the other day I was at the diner in Mount Shasta, the Black Bear Diner, and they had a couple of people that were out sick and they were overworked, and there were 20 people outside in the lobby waiting to come in to be seated, but there were 6 tables that needed to be bussed. And I offered to bus the tables, and I was serious, I would have done it. I knew it was going to be a while before my order came. And I was sitting at the counter, I said to the waitress, give me a card, I'm happy to bus the tables. And she was totally shocked, But I was serious, that would have made me very happy to do that, because, God needs these tables bussed, and I am the presence of God, and the people waiting to come in are God, and they have little children with them who are God, who are hungry, wanting to eat. And I could facilitate them getting their breakfast if I bussed the tables, So she wouldn't let me do it for legal reasons or something, but later on I went to the men's room, and the men's room was dirty. And it said, report this to the management. And there was a sign if you see a problem with the restroom. And I realized they were already way overworked. So I just got down on my hands and knees, picked up all the wet towels on the floor, paper towels, and cleaned up the bathroom myself. So it looked good. Of course, I washed my hands real well afterward. But, I felt like God can do anything. God can even clean bathroom floor, And I walked out really happy, that, my service is not always making videos or writing spiritual books or doing workshops. It can also be cleaning bathroom floors, why not? Or helping someone stuck by the side of the road who needs a tire changed, I knew a guy in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Jay Shearer. He was an IM student, and he was also a naturopathic doctor and a chiropractor. And even when he was 70 years old, he slept at night with the CB radio on. So if someone on the freeway, if the car broke down and they called on the CB radio, of course now they have cell phones, this was before cell phones. So if someone called out for an emergency, he would get up at any time during the night, go out in his car, and he had a power winch on the front of his car, and he could tow people out of a ditch, So even though he was regarded, as a pillar of the community, he had the compassion for other people and the willingness to, put his life on the line and to sleep at night with the radio on, sometimes hear calls that he didn't need to respond to, like truckers talking or something. But if someone needed help, he was there. So he really put the I am teachings into action. He did not feel superior to anybody. And I went to him for healing once, and he said, I need to do physical manipulation on the body so I can charge money for what I do. But the real healing comes from the I am affirmations that I'm doing. When I'm working on people, I'm invoking the violet fire, and I'm calling on the light to come in them. So we all find ways to apply the spiritual teachings in daily life. So it's kind of a long way to answer your question. I just want to be happy, but I think you're on the right path. Is there anything else you wanted to ask? Or? Yeah.
How do you find the balance between humility and stepping into the your calling as far as being of service, and if God is calling you to be a shepherd for the word or a guide, to find the balance between humility and confidence as we, develop into our gifts and the I am presence, because I feel like the more you connect with God, the more those gifts start to come through so that you're able to most optimally be of service. So how would you say you find the balance?
It's not so much an outer thing, it's an inner feeling, Like when I was cleaning the bathroom floor in the restaurant, I was not thinking this is real humility, because that would have been egotism. Because there was work needed to be done, and God in me was coming forth. It wasn't my mind, my ego. It was just a compulsion that came from my heart to do it, And if you start thinking, like some people think, well, I see a homeless person, I'm going to give them food. But if you do it from ego, like, wow, aren't I humble, or aren't I a compassionate person? Then, it's taken you in the wrong direction, Like there's some people that do that, they're actually very vain, or the word is, the modern word is narcissistic, that I'm going to go feed these homeless people, but I'm going to have a film crew with me to film me feeding the poor. So I'll be like Mother Teresa, and then people will see how humble I am, because that makes me feel good if people praise me for being humble. But that's not real humility. Do you know what I mean? I mean, really having compassion for the person and doing it out of that, regardless if anybody ever sees it or not, It's really the inner quality there, and you only really find that by really deep self-observation, inner, what is it in me that is doing this, to observe what is going on inside, how am I feeling about this situation, how am I feeling about myself, what story am I telling myself? That's kind of something that I think is very helpful. Most people have a story, about, I would have achieved this in my life if this had not happened to me when I was a child, if my mother had not dropped me on my head when I was 2, or, if my father had not left home, when I was a child, or, if we hadn't been poor, my life would be so much better. And to think of a story, to explain why I feel the way I do, it's kind of avoiding the issue, because how our lives have worked out is pretty much dependent on our actions in past lives, And so we chose to be born to the parents that we were born to, and chose to have certain life situations, But if we take responsibility for them, at least for how we feel about it, and come to observe our stories, then we can get beyond the story and find the real author of the story, which is God, So it's really, sit down. When you sit down to meditate, say, what am I feeling? And where is that coming from? Like I ran a meditation center in Mount Shasta for close to 3 years, with the help of other people. And we did the Vipassana meditation. And one day it occurred to me to ask, why am I meditating even? Why are we all meditating? And I realized it's because there was some suffering we were trying to escape from, that I was not looking at the cause of the suffering. I just wanted to get out of here as fast as possible. And if I closed my eyes, watch my breath, I would go into an altered state where I felt happy. But at the end of the meditation, by the time I came back started walking home at night, then the unhappiness or the whatever it was, the loneliness, feeling of separation from people, whatever, that would come back, you know? So then I realized, what if instead of meditating just to go into bliss, I would examine myself as where is that story? Where is that loneliness, or where is that sadness, or where is that anger coming from? And then I would see it was all related to the story that I was telling myself, or the story other people had told me, or the story my parents had told me, or my teachers, or my guru, whatever. But I've got to find the source of that story myself and get beyond it. And then, you know, as Eckhart Tolle said, he realized there was someone observing his story, that he was chronically depressed, you know. And then he said, who is it that's observing the Eckhart that's depressed? And he realized there was another self that was not depressed, and he could identify with that. You know, so, you know, there's the story, and then there's the storyteller, and then there's the author of the story, and eventually you connect with the author, and you can say, I can change my story. This does not have to be my story for the rest of my life. I created this story, I can uncreate it, I can write a new story. So the author is God, you know.
So yesterday you were talking about Korea and how, you know, that practice is so centered on raising the Kundalini and reaching enlightenment that, you know, focusing on the heart is not so much a part of that practice. So would you say that the heart gets you there even quicker? Going through the heart as the epicenter towards the light, do you feel like that's a faster way, or if that even exists?
Well, it's not, you know, question is it more important to focus on the heart or the third eye, you know, the Ajna chakra or some other chakra? Like in martial arts, you'd be focusing on the heart, the solar plexus more, to bring the energy more into the physical, you know. At different times in your life, the different centers have more focus than at other times, you know. Like my teacher Pearl noticed that a lot of the women, the New Age women that came that were on the spiritual path, had problems in pregnancy because the energy was all being focused in the higher chakras. Well, if you're pregnant, you need to bring the energy down. It's okay to have the energy in the lower chakras. You know, that's where the baby is nurtured, you know. And that's important at that time. Or, you know, if you eat a meal, you don't want to work on bringing your energy up here right after the meal, or you'll get indigestion, you know. So, you know, in samadhi, your energy is in, you know, the Ajna chakra, even higher, you know, even beyond the body completely. But we are here as human beings in these bodies, and the great lesson we are here to learn is compassion. And the focus of that is really here. And it's very interesting, you see pictures, almost every picture or statue of the Buddha, he has his eyes closed. He's seated in lotus position with his eyes closed. That means he's pretty much shutting out the world, and he's, you know, in general focused on mental realization, although they do talk about compassion, but still the focus is more on the mental realization of Buddhahood. You look at the pictures of Jesus, he's standing sometimes with his hands up like this, and he has his eyes open, like there's the attitude of giving, sharing, being in the world. And you see those paintings of him where he's opening up his chest and shows his heart. There's a word for that. It's the heart of Christ. He's showing that. In fact, there's pictures of Mary revealing her heart, the immaculate heart of Mary, you know. And I met monks on Mount Athos in Greece that just were absolutely beautiful beings. They were just glowing. And I was on my way to India, and I thought, why should I go to India? I could study with these monks, you know? Yeah. So I asked one, we were eating in the same place in town. When their dinner was over, they got up to leave. I said, may I ask you a question? What is your spiritual practice? Like, do you have a mantra, or, you know, do you do Kriya Yoga or whatever, you know? And they said, we only have one practice. It's very simple, which we meditate on the heart of Christ being everywhere known. May the heart of Christ be everywhere known. And we try to see that heart of Christ in everyone, including ourselves. So it comes back to that, really, you know. So, and if you do that, eventually, you will find the energy goes inward and upward. So you may start out meditating on the heart chakra, but by itself, it will raise up, and you will find yourself in the higher chakras, or even not focused in the physical at all. You will be in your I am presence. Now, in the I am presence, that's the combination of enlightened mind and enlightened heart. So in addition to enlightenment, we could use the term enlivenment, to get out of the patriarchal thing of enlightenment, that we need to have enlightened hearts too. And love without attachment. So in the I am presence, the two of those are merged. The mental part is, maybe say the outer part of the circle, and the Divine Mother aspect, more the heart of the I am presence. But the two are in like union, and there's a constant sort of dialogue between the two going on. It's like a love affair in your I am presence between divine mind and divine love, But as you bring that down, into the physical body, you will perceive it as divine love and divine mind working simultaneously together, so it's not one or the other, really. But I find a lot of people on various, so-called more ascetic spiritual paths tend to focus on the Ajna chakra, and there needs to be, bringing that light down more in, as learning compassion and love and things like that, Like my old friend Ramdas used to say, someone asked him, I don't know if I'm going crazy on the spiritual path or I'm becoming enlightened. And he said, well, if you feel you're superior to other people, you're going in the wrong direction. But if you start feeling more and more compassion for people, your spiritual path is taking you in the right direction. So that doesn't mean let people walk on you either. Again, learning relationship, part of successful relationship is learning to set boundaries, So it's all an amazing lesson being human beings on the earth, Like even the great beings like Archangel Michael, he sets boundaries. He's motivated by divine love, but he says, you can go here and not there. You can do this, but not that. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How does one walk the path and still be successful in the physical world with a career. I feel like sometimes when I meditate too much, I feel complete and like I don't need anything else. I lose the desires and I kind of put away my career. So I feel like it's a fine line that I'm walking in. If I meditate too much, I don't want to be successful. I feel complete, happy. How can I find balance?
Well, if you ask God, the question is, really, how can I find balance between meditating too much or too much energy in career, find the balance between the two. Again, it's not something you can mentally decide. Again, when I wake up in the morning, first thing I say is, I am the great divine director of my life and world, And then just follow the feeling, see what happens, There's some days I have absolutely nothing scheduled, and I think, oh boy, I'm going to just meditate most of the day, there's nothing to do. I'll go for a walk maybe, I'll meditate. And then, then I'll maybe after an hour of meditation, I'll get this feeling, go into town and check your mail. Well, on the way, I stop somewhere and I meet an old friend, Like I think I met you on the street one day like that, or at a cafe or something like that. If I hadn't followed that guidance, I wouldn't have met you. And then something else happens, then something else happens. So by the end of the day, I think, gee, this day was absolutely full of things happening. There was some schedule I didn't know anything about, So trust in the masters and your own I am presence to organize your life. And then it's just a question of following that feeling. And frequently it's not a voice, it's just a feeling to do something. And people say, well, how do I know that's real and it's not just some astral entity trying to influence me? Well, you start to move in the direction and it's either going to feel better or worse. If the energy is flowing, follow the energy. But if you start to get in your car to go somewhere and the energy just goes out of it and you don't feel like turning the ignition key, then come back inside and say, I guess that was just my mind, But then 10 minutes later, you may get that feeling again, and this time it's right, So, like sometimes I hear, go to the health food store in Mount Shasta, and I don't need anything. Why should I go there? And walking up and down the aisles, and some, oh, Peter, I was looking for you. I didn't know how to get hold of you. I'm so glad I ran into you. And so that happens all the time. So just, trust that there is a plan for your life, and you don't need to figure it out on paper,
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, well, to be continued some other time maybe, huh?
To be continued.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Namaste.
Namaste.